seat.
Thank you.
How are you doing? How's it coming?
Fine, teacher. I'm just finding I need money to get like very good sources. I found a book on internet, Google,
Okay.
and it was like it had like error analysis, types of errors.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't for free.
Okay, so you weren't able to find, because did you look in Google Books?
Yes, actually,
Okay.
that was in Google Books.
And they didn't have anything available?
No, actually, that part of the book, that unit, wasn't available. Only two
Okay.
units and parts of the unit.
Have you tried in eBrary? Were you able to find any books in eBrary?
No, I just
Okay.
look for some academic Google, Scholar Google,
Okay.
also on the Learning Journal.
Well, check in eBrary because they have a lot of books available, and you might find what you're looking for there. So let's see. I want to find out. Okay, so have you found some primary research articles?
Yeah, some of them. I actually found some one article that wasn't. I think it wasn't a primary one, but it gave me like good information. Actually, I upload that information to Google Drive.
Okay.
So I also upload part of the academic writing work from last semester.
Okay.
It is already at the end. It is error analysis.
Okay. Have you? Okay. All right.
And the things below are like parts of the text that I want to know if they are good enough in order to.
Okay. All right. I think this is how. Let's do this. In this section, since this is where your literature review is going to be, go ahead and add first your research questions here at the end and your thesis statement here at the beginning. Now this will be the introduction, and we can work later on the introduction, but go ahead and add the thesis statement here so I can see and you can see kind of the main idea that you have for your literature review and your research questions. Now what you can do is, if you already have a literature review here at the bottom, go ahead and, if there's something that, if you think this is what you want to start with, go ahead and add this information up here in the literature review section. But go ahead and add your headings here. So the headings are going to be in bold just like they appear here, but to the left on their own line. So you would add your text here and so on. You're going to have anywhere from 2 to 4 main sections. So this is what I'd like to see first are your research questions and your thesis statement, and then those main sections here. And then from there, go ahead and insert the text to the appropriate heading or the appropriate section or subsection. Now, if you already have something towards the bottom, go ahead and move that information up here, but go ahead and try to respect these same headings and as a type of outline, so I can kind of see how you want to organize your work. Now it looks like here you have a section here on error analysis, types of errors. Okay, so I just see 2 main headings. So
I have 2 more at the bottom, but they don't have any text. Grammar and error correction. In the last page. At the beginning, yes.
Okay.
But I was wondering if 4 headings are okay, or.
Well, it depends on what the headings are. So, like, for example, if you're starting off with types of errors and then error analysis, you might start talking first about the types of errors and then error analysis.
Okay.
Just so you're like talking about the what first, and then the how. The how would be the analysis, right? Right now we kind of need to think about the topics. Now, for example, the grammar and error correction. Now, grammar, I don't know, maybe that's a subheading. And types of errors, like what are the different types of errors? Some are grammatical, some are, I don't know if you. The thing is, we need to probably limit the scope of our literature review, not to talk about a lot of different things.
Okay.
That's why our research questions are really critical. That's why I want to see those research questions first.
Okay.
And that I want you to think about those. So you only include in your literature review information that directly
Yes.
is covered in your research questions. Now, the research questions are going to be dependent on what you have here, because I want to find out, okay, so this information you have here, this is the basis that I'm highlighting. This is the basis of your research questions. But they are also very much related to step 2, what you wish to examine. So try to look at both step 2, what you want to examine, and this section, what do you want to find out, to make sure you're asking yourself, okay, to answer my research questions, how am I going to measure it, right? What am I going to measure and how am I going to measure it? And if you say, okay, I think I have kind of an idea about how to measure it, then include it in your literature review.
Okay.
So we have to kind of think kind of the whole picture here. I don't want you to think only of the theory without thinking of the practicalities and the feasibility of doing your research. Because if it's something that you think, oh, there's no way I can measure it, or I don't think it's going to be practical or possible for this semester to measure this, then you don't want to talk a lot about it in your theory. Okay, so it's very important, and this is kind of the hard part right now, is kind of think of the theory, but also in terms of the actual research that you're going to be conducting in a few weeks.
Okay.
Right. So since we have about 2 weeks to finish our literature review, right now you need to start writing, and I'd like to see kind of how you want to organize your literature review based on your research questions. So go ahead and start moving your information around, okay, using what you have, but thinking about the sections, because if types of errors, error correction is still fairly broad. We need to think about the types of errors corrected. So I'm assuming also we're talking about error correction through spoken dialogue. So you may want to mention that in your research questions about correcting speaking, right? Instead of to differentiate that from correcting writing, to make it a little bit more specific. Yeah. So for example, here you may say, I want to find out when a teacher corrects student speaking errors.
Okay.
Something that links to speaking. Which types of errors are corrected? Alright, so yeah, the thing here is to focus again on speaking. Now I'm assuming you're focusing on speaking here, is that right? The types of errors? Performance errors. See, for example here, performance errors and competence errors. Like when you talk about competence errors, you may not want to talk a lot about competence errors, because that's something very difficult to measure. The performance errors is a little bit, and you can mention it, but it's not going to be like a big part of your literature review. I would focus more on performance or output hypothesis. Okay, Schmidt's output hypothesis might be something that you talk about, because you're really basing it on the student's output, what they say. Output hypothesis, Schmidt's output hypothesis. You're going to be, let's see. I don't know if it's in here. No, it's. You might we talked some about this. Like here's output hypothesis by Swain. Sorry, Swain, not Schmidt. Swain, 1985, 1995. Output hypothesis and interaction hypothesis. These are all related to how students and teacher interact. And since you're talking about feedback and performance errors, even feedback, recast, negative evidence, these are all kind of key terms that you can measure. Recasts, like how often do recasts occur? And you'll have to do a discourse analysis, so you're going to be measuring what the teacher says versus what the student says, because you're looking at this feedback. How are they correcting the students, right? So another thing you'll need to think about is not so much now, but later. You'll have to ask yourself are you focusing on corrected errors that come from the teacher only, or are you concerned or interested in how students correct themselves, peer correction, or even self-correction? So that's another element to think about, like what you want to observe, to make sure you include that in the theory. Mm-hmm. See, if you're not interested in self-correction or peer correction, you're only interested in teacher correction, well, just make sure you include that's the focus of your literature review, that you don't talk a lot about peer correction.
Actually, I would like to talk about self-correction, not that much about peer correction, but self-correction.
Okay, so have you found research that focuses on...
Last semester I read something about... Yes, I have the article.
All right, make sure it's primary research articles. So if you have plenty of primary research articles for self-correction and you can base your research on that, great. Okay. Focus mostly on self-correction. Now, self-correction then is not going to be... there's not much about recasting. Basically everything I said here doesn't really apply, like recasts, because recasts would be between the teacher and the students. So you find those key terms for peer assessment and just focus only on peer assessment, like self-directed learning, autonomous learning. A lot of those key concepts will I think would be included to a degree in your literature review. Okay. So let's start with that. Update your Google Drive. First, the research questions. Make sure you narrow them down just a bit. Based on step 1. Remember, your research questions again are coming directly from this section here, because I want to find out when the teacher corrects. So now if you're telling me that you only want to focus on self-correction, then you don't want to find out what the teacher does, do you? It's more about how the student corrects himself or herself. So you need to modify this in Canvas and then derive your research questions. I would say anywhere between 2 to 4 research questions, probably no more than 4, but at least 2. But they come directly from this comment, that you have here. Because I want to find out how students self-correct and what type of errors that they correct themselves with, and how do students feel. So this doesn't really apply either.
If I focus on how teacher corrects, but if I mention something about self-correction, is it okay? Like most of the research is going to be focused on the teacher.
Well, it depends on. Okay, so what do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on the teacher?
Mainly on the teacher, because I think it will be like easier to get more information.
Okay, so that. I would not focus much at all on self correction.
Okay.
It's just too much, I would focus on one or the other. If you want to focus on the teacher feedback, then focus on the discourse between the teacher and the students. Now, the discourse can be one teacher to the whole group, or one teacher to a small group, or one teacher to one individual. So that doesn't affect your theory now, but later you need to think about how, what you're going to measure,
Yes.
and how you're going to, what you're going to look for, or how you're going to do an intervention if necessary to make sure you get the information you need to analyze.
Okay.
But, I say that now because you need to be thinking about that also, because in your theory, maybe there's a difference between the teacher correcting a whole class versus a teacher correcting a small group versus a teacher correcting an individual student, a one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's some theory that discusses that. So if there is theory that discusses the differences between the ways in which teachers provide feedback in that way, ask yourself realistically, what are you going to be assessing? Because maybe you can't assess all of those situations, which I don't think you can. It's either going to be one teacher to a whole group or one teacher to a small group where you look for those situations, or maybe one teacher to one student, but I think that's might be difficult. So I think that it's either going to be teacher to a whole group, teacher to a small group, and then you just decide what do you want to measure based on what you think is most perhaps common or practical, or that's most feasible for you to set up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Kind of? Okay, so the main thing is that the theory aligns to what you research. You don't want to talk much about theoretical concepts that don't relate much to what you want to research. That's the main point. So go ahead and go back to Canvas, update the second section to step 1. I'd like for you to look at step 2 again and ask yourself if this is, again, accurate, the evidence, the type of evidence you plan to assess. Go into your Google Drive document. Go ahead and start moving the text that you have, whatever you think is appropriate. After you have added the research questions, the thesis statement, and the main headings. I'd like for you to add this information first so that you can kind of see based on what's the structure of your theory, right? And then go ahead and start inserting and adding text up here.
Okay, talking about the grammar part, because it's going to be focused on grammar. And grammar should be like a subheading.
Well, if grammar is like the whole thing, like you're only focusing on error correction based on grammar, then you're going to be focused. These subheadings will be subheadings of grammar. Is it, for example, implicit? You might talk about implicit, explicit, or overt, covert grammar. Okay, but it's all about grammar.
Yes.
So it's all about like subheadings of grammar.
Okay.
So you wouldn't have like a heading called grammar or grammar correction, because the whole thing is grammar correction, correcting grammar. So you're looking at how you're going to divide up that one topic of grammar.
Okay.
So think of these headings here as subtopics of your thesis statement. So the thesis statement is the one general idea, and these main headings are subdivisions or subtopics of the thesis statement. Okay. All right. So I just want to look here. So yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and start on that. We have 2 weeks. Go ahead and start adding text. And if you want me to look at something this week, send me an email on Canvas. Otherwise, we'll look at it again in your next tutoring session to see how it's coming together. But organization really is the key here, is making sure that the information in your theory relates to your research, but is that you're forming an argument. And I am reminding everyone to remember to look in modules for week 2, that link of how to develop an argument, because that really relates directly to what we're talking about here as far as organizing your ideas behind or within these claims that you want to set up. Okay, so think of your literature review as an argument. Think of your thesis statement as the answer to your research questions. So just like you are going to do your own research to answer your research questions, the theory, that is the experts and the claims that you set up in your theory, also address answering your research questions.
Okay.
All right. So the research questions are like the heart and soul of your whole literature review. And so always keep those in mind. Every time you write, every day that you contribute to your literature review, first thing is review those research questions again to make sure that they're really you're thinking about those throughout the time that you develop your literature review. So you're not talking about something that's off topic.
Okay.
All right. Any questions or doubts or concerns at this point?
That will be all.
So the main thing is not to narrow down your topic a little bit more, and yeah, write up as much as you can. We've got 2 weeks, so
Yes.
go ahead and do whatever you can, and we'll go from there. Anytime you feel confused or not sure about something, see me or send me an email. Okay, and I'll take a look at your work there.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, teacher.
All right. See you. Take care.
You too, teacher.